I'm here to welcome Colin Fowler and Sergeant Andrew Knight to our Lunch and Learn today. The title of the presentation is Culture and Mental Health, Eliciting the Big Picture During Crisis Intervention. And Andrew is on the board of our NAMI affiliate here in Johnson County. He graduated from the University of Iowa with a master's degree in cultural studies and has been serving as a police officer with the Iowa City Department since 2014, formerly assigned as a patrol sergeant on the late night watch, and is currently the sergeant tasked with shaping the department's mental health response and enhancing community outreach initiatives. Andrew's a team lead on the crisis negotiation team and serves as an instructor on the crisis intervention team, or CIT, providing training to law enforcement officers throughout Iowa. And with him is Colin Fowler, who is going to be his co-presenter today. He presents with Andrew at CIT International, and since 1999 has been a downtown liaison officer. He's just returned to that position, really focusing on homeless outreach and trying to mitigate conflicts. So welcome to the two of you. You will be, as everyone knows, we're recording this and it will be on our YouTube channel later.
Well, thanks for the introductions, Joanna. We're really glad to be here. Colin and I have been doing a variety of presentations throughout the community, throughout the state, and this is a presentation that we put together back in 2018, I think it was. Right off the bat, I want to acknowledge Alison Oliver, who's a University of Iowa professor who was instrumental in putting together this information so that we can look to reach as many officers as possible, just to try and see if we can improve how we respond to calls when individuals may be from a different culture than our own. This presentation was born out of a desire to go from being consumers of information, which Colin and I had done. We've been to any number of CIT courses from Fort Lauderdale to St. Louis, San Antonio, all over the place, learning about CIT, and then bringing all that information back to as lead instructors for the CIT program that we have here in Johnson County. So after doing that for several years, we decided that we wanted to try and take a stab at working, collaborating and putting together something that we could maybe present at future conferences and future places. And so what you're about to hear is the presentation that we did in Seattle in 2019. We were invited back to Pittsburgh in 2020, but got canceled because of COVID. And then we went to Arizona in 2021 to present the topic. And we've been invited to present in Pittsburgh again at CIT International 2022. So what you're going to hear is an effort on our part to try and just equip officers with more information as they look to deal with people in crisis situations. We're not experts in the field. It's important that you know that. Colin has his undergraduate degree in psychology, and I have a master's degree in cultural studies. That doesn't give us any expert status on the topic, but what we do have is a wealth of experience in dealing with people in crisis. And it's worth pointing out that I've never had anyone in crisis ask me what my credentials are or what degrees I have or anything like that. So we're just two well-intentioned police officers who want to try and contribute to the field. So this is our effort. This is the first time we've done anything on Zoom. So I ask for your grace when I click on the wrong button, as it will inevitably happen, or when I advance these slides like 10 at a time. Anyway, so we're really thankful for the opportunity to be here. So what we're going to look at today is essentially we're looking to provide everybody here. And when we talk to police officers, we're looking to give them information about the connections between mental illness and particular cultural identities. So there's a lot of information that's on these slides, and the goal is really to provide nuggets of information, if you will, to add to your existing body of knowledge. So we're asking police officers to take this information and just add to what they already know. So as the graphic shows, it's about coming into a situation and making sure that we recognize what's our stuff and what's their stuff and how all that is going to interact. And so that's really what cultural intelligence is to me. It's about how we can be strategic about how that interaction happens so that I can own my stuff and I can, at the same time, I can honor somebody else's so that we can figure out what we should do next. It's about using culturally sensitive communication strategies that work to establish rapport and hopefully establish rapport very quickly, because we don't always have a lot of time to take the necessary time to establish rapport. So we're recognizing that officers are under a time crunch too. But really we're looking to establish rapport in a quick manner so that we can reduce and minimize harm to the rapport that's been built. And that allows us to work together towards a resolution so that we can figure out what makes the most sense. So an example of all of this, we like to talk a little bit about police culture. So Colin's going to talk a little bit about that.
So I've been part of this police culture for about 26 years now, and it's a very unique culture. So usually when we give this presentation, I ask anybody in the group if they have any family or friends that are police officers. Anybody here have any family or friends that are police officers? Anybody? No? If you've ever gone out to dinner or lunch with a police officer, you'll find that they almost always want to sit with their back to the wall or the corner, and they always want to see the exits and entrances. That's just kind of a byproduct of our training and our experience. We want to see who's coming and going and not have our backs available. If you've ever gone to a police station or training for police officers, you'll see that they kind of park differently. Anybody know how they park? They always back in, right? They always back their cars in. That's part of our odd culture. There's some other idiosyncrasies about that. They like to wear a certain type of embroidered polo shirt. I found when you go to training, everyone has these shirts with embroidered patches and badges on them and things like that. There's also a kind of a dark sense of humor that is developed over time. Some would call it a sense of gallows humor based on the things we see on a daily basis. And the reason I bring up all these examples of the police culture is to point out that if you aren't self-aware enough to know how your experiences have changed you, you won't know how your lens is affecting what you perceive in others. So my point is, later on you'll hear people talk about like an Anglo lens or something like that. Police officers have to realize that when they go into a situation, they're viewing all these people and experiences through their own lens. And if you aren't aware of your own lens to begin with, it could make it more difficult for you to understand where someone else is coming from. So it's important for us, for officers, to know what our own lens is.
So in any particular culture, there are those things that we can see that are really apparent. So it's things like language of origin, accents, the choice of words that people use, how a person might dress, how they present themselves. But what we also know is that there's a ton of stuff that's bubbling underneath the surface that we may not be aware of. So as officers, if we go into a situation to make a really quick assessment about something, there's things that under the surface that we might miss. And missing these creates barriers to doing our job. So culture plus crisis equals idioms of distress. And what we're seeing here is that the way that distress looks like is different depending on your cultural experience. So when I'm stressed out based on my cultural experience, this might look different from how you might look when you're stressed out. And how people experience mental illness, how it manifests itself in the body, is also what we would call culturally specific. So throughout the next little while, and what we do when we're training law enforcement officers, we're going to be taking some time to talk about different aspects of cultural experiences. And those experiences are based on research. But research tends to focus on one cultural experience at a time. However, as human beings, we don't. We don't just have one experience at a time. We live in layers. So the idea is to present trends and possibilities that are relevant to minority and marginalized communities. And some of these communities you might be a part of or you might engage with. So there may be information offered on the slides that you identify with, or that we identify with, and there will also be some information presented that you don't identify with. So you should know that all the cultural groups that we chose to identify in this presentation are groups that typically find themselves marginalized in the United States. They're also groups that have some unique angles about the combination of being in crisis and of engaging or not engaging in help seeking, and their general reactions to that. So before I go on, I just want to say all the research that was done on these groups, it wasn't done by us. The research that we present was done by individuals who are part of that group. Okay, so when we present research about Muslim groups or LGBTQ groups, they were done by individuals who are they themselves part of those groups. It's an important thing to note. So healthcare, social work, law enforcement systems, they tend to take on what's called a Western European lens of how we approach mental illness and crisis. So it's this medical model that focuses on what is wrong with the individual, even though how people may interpret their experiences may be quite different. So we tend to value that individual behavioral change might resolve the crisis, but we have to recognize that that is a culturally specific assumption that gets reinforced a lot in our systems. We also tend to place a higher value on formal systems interventions, right, compared to other informal interventions. So, like utilizing family or peers or community members or spiritual and religious leaders. In fact, many systems tend to be suspicious of people seeking specifically spiritual or religious support rather than a licensed mental health therapist. And we need to know that. So what we're really saying is being aware of what's our own stuff, right? So that we don't accidentally or unintentionally minimize or dismiss someone or dismiss what other people think might be the best course of action for them as we look to collaborate with them to figure out what's actually happening. So we're going to offer up some slides here that are related to racial identities, ethnic identities, and other experiential identities. We know that there's a lot of experience here in the room, and it's our hope that throughout the training, your experiences may interface with some of the information that you're going to hear. And again, we're presenting this as two well-intentioned police officers, not as professionals in the field. Normally, I would stop and ask for questions. I don't know that the forum's really good for that, but if anyone has anything to add, you can jump in at any time, and we'll try and answer it as best as we can. So the first category that we chose was Native Americans, and there's 564 federally recognized tribes nationwide. And something to keep in mind is that most Native Americans, and this is a really important thing to understand, most Native Americans live outside of reservation areas or outside settlements, and help seeking tends to be dependent on tribal affiliation. So some Native Americans that police officers may encounter may not have access to services, because the only people who have tribal affiliation are those whose fathers have tribal affiliation, right? So if you have a Meskwaki mother and a non-Meskwaki father, you don't have tribal affiliation or tribal membership. And so what that means is you don't have access to tribal services. So this is important to know. It's also important to know that this population has got a lot of acute stressors that impact mental illness. And I don't need to go through them all, but as you can see, you know, when it talks about 1 in 2 Native American individuals experiencing intimate partner violence, for example, or the fact that 26% live in poverty, when police officers roll up on this population, they tend to have a lot of high ACE scores. Is everyone familiar with adverse childhood experiences? And looking just at the data, just understanding the level of trauma that the individual you're dealing with has likely gone through should inform you and sort of guide you as to how best to help them as they look to engage in help-seeking activities. So talking specifically about the African American community and mental illness, and specifically how it gets manifested or treated. With this group, the values of communalism are apparent, which means being there for each other and having each other's backs. We will often hear members of the African American community talk in we's. You know, this phrase, we've only got us, is a common phrase that we hear. There's a focus on spiritualism in the United States specifically, usually either Christian or Muslim. And mental illness might be viewed in this population as a test or as a struggle to be endured. Something that's not necessarily psychologically wrong, but something that has been presented as a challenge to endure or a punishment by a higher power is something else that we've heard. Something else to note in the research is that African Americans are 3 to 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is grossly disproportionate based on genetic predisposition and acute environmental stressors. Something else to consider is that is a barrier to help seeking is the history of experimentation within medical institutions, which I think many of you will be aware of. The one that comes to mind that gets talked about frequently is the Tuskegee experiment. So being sensitive to this, part of history, and being empathetic to some of the help-seeking reservations that folks might have is really, really important to understand. And it's important for our officers to understand that too, and to take the steps necessary just to educate ourselves a little better so we can better serve this population. Want to go?
Sure. Okay. So one of the things that I learned through this presentation when I first heard it was the difference between Muslim and Arab Americans. Arab refers to the Arabic Peninsula as a geographical and not a religion. And this is an important thing for us to keep in mind when we deal with communities, that they're not all synonymous with each other. When we deal with people from this community, we found, and the research shows, that they're much more patriarchal. So sometimes on calls like this, you'll have to adjust how you would do your normal investigations if you're investigating something. You'll have to remind yourself that this family structure doesn't work in a way that we're used to with our Western lens. Family honor is very important, something that is a little alien to some people from our country probably. And they might tell you things in a light that is going to not dishonor the family. They have a respect for authority in this population, and strong cross-gender boundaries. There's mention in the research about the discrimination that this group has endured since 9/11, and I was working as a police officer when 9/11 happened, and I can tell you that we got a lot of calls after 9/11 for us to go investigate people just because they appeared to be Arab American, and they had the nerve to be on the street. So for a while there, we had people calling 911 about there is an Arab person there at the bus stop. And so we had to kind of educate the public that that's not something that we respond to. And that those types of calls and that general perception since 9/11 was something that had to be a stressor for them. Mental illness might be seen as possession by evil spirits and not something that should be treated by a doctor. Also, if you are from this group and you use or receive mental health services, it can affect the family honor, which is something that you have to recall, because sometimes when you deal with people that are reluctant to tell you things in our line of work, you might perceive that as someone who's lying to you. But when you remind yourself that some of these communities, that they're trying to preserve honor, that it's not deception. That's another thing we have to try and keep in the forefront. When you respond to domestics, like I mentioned earlier, this can be a big deal in terms of how you connect that investigation. You want to?
Yeah, I guess.
Good.
We just gotta move some things around here. Colin's better at doing it without talking. Asian Pacific Islander groups. This is a vastly diverse group in Iowa, particularly in our area. We have a lot of East Asian, South Asian, Polynesian. The most common in Iowa are Vietnamese, Indian, Chinese, and Laotian. Chinese students compose about 75% of the international student population worldwide. In Iowa, that's about 10% of our student population. So for our officers who are policing in a college town, this is a population that we absolutely will have contact with. So it made it onto our slide because we want to try and educate ourselves so that we can better serve this population. So some trends related to API include emotional self-control and collectivism, this notion of filial piety, which is essentially making decisions that make our parents proud and avoiding decisions that may bring shame. So in terms of mental health help seeking, this is the least likely of all the groups to access mental health service. Oftentimes, they don't view mental illness as an individual issue, and it's considered a family issue. It's considered a family affliction. It's also considered as being highly embarrassing. What also makes things challenging for us is that mental health issues tend to manifest through body symptoms rather than cognitive symptoms. So instead of having an individual who self-reports maybe distorted thought patterns or expressions of anxiety, it's very rare that you'll hear that within this group. You're more likely to hear physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, heart palpitations. And if you ask a person from this group, are you feeling depressed? They'll often say no, and it doesn't mean that they're not depressed. So it looks different. It just looks different within this population. And for police officers, we find ourselves performing welfare checks on a number of individuals from different cultures. And it's important for us to educate officers about this particular population so that they know what questions to ask. If you're on a welfare check because someone has asked you to check up on a member of the Asian Pacific Islander community, maybe they haven't been going to class, maybe they're on academic probation. When a member of this community is on academic probation, that is often an extremely difficult thing for them to come to terms with. So we ultimately have to work harder to communicate with these individuals. Listening to some of the symptoms that they provide. A lot of the times I would go on welfare checks and predominantly with Asian college age women, and being on academic probation can send them off into a tailspin. And I have known individuals who have been involved in suicide, and then we've found academic probation letters after the fact. So it's important for us to educate our police officers what type of questions they should ask on welfare checks. What time is it in the semester? Have they just finished midterms? Or have they just finished finals? How did that go? Understanding that the embarrassment that can go with failure in this population can lead to an absolute risk of suicide. So understanding the timing of university calendars, understanding the face-saving techniques that are involved in this community, in this population, and that they may rather die so they can save face than to admit to someone that they're academically struggling or that they need help. So it's really quite important.
So he mentioned filial piety in this culture, which I always, especially lately, have found interesting considering how much it differs with the US. In this community, they have so much respect for elders and their ancestors that it's hard for people from the Western lens to relate to. When I was in high school, I had a friend who was Laotian. When I went to his home, the attic had a large banquet table with food on it and incense burning that was always replenished as an offering to ancestors. And then when I compare that to my teenage kids who refer to old people as boomers, and there's nothing you could possibly learn from a person who's over 40, there's such a contrast there that it's, I try and keep it at the forefront of my mind when I'm dealing with people from this culture. I had a call years ago with a woman who was from this group, and it was kind of a low intensity call. It was just a medical call for someone who had ingested poison. And if you're not in this line of work, suicide attempt calls are very common. But we went there with the paramedics, and they looked at the bottle of poison that she'd ingested, and we all calmly got, out of the apartment and on our way to the hospital. And when I got to the hospital, that's when I learned from the paramedic that there was nothing they could do, that the amount of time had passed and the poison worked in such a way that it was going to be fatal. And I was shocked, and we found out that the reason she did that was because she had come from a country on the screen with her husband to go to med school. He went to med school, and then he told her that day that he wanted a divorce. And the shame of being divorced was too much to bear in that culture. So she decided that she was going to die by suicide.
So just before we advance that, the biggest takeaway for officers on this slide is really trying to get them to understand that they need to be somewhat indirect in their conversations. Sometimes they're going to get answers that don't make sense, and to restate questions in different ways. I often encourage officers to check up on individuals, ask them, hey, would you mind if I checked up on you in a day or two? Go back. Sometimes that second time helps them break down some cultural barriers, that helps them guide the individual to get some real tangible help. So we really believe that this is important information and important work to be done.
Latinos are the largest ethnic group in the US, and that culture has a unique value on collectivism, hospitality, and familial loyalty that is a little different than the Western experience. And they have some terms like Marianismo, Machismo, and Feminismo that influence mental health stigma. So one of the things I remind myself when I'm dealing with people from this is that, especially in terms of mental health or even domestic situations, that the males I'm dealing with, if they ascribe or subscribe to the idea of machismo, that they're supposed to be in charge of everything. And if they're not in charge of everything, then they need to regain control of that. And then Marianismo refers to the idea that women are home-centered, passive, and self-sacrificing. So if you're dealing with a culture that embraces both of these, and then you introduce mental health, you can see how maybe the male, since he's supposed to be in charge, if he has a mental illness that's going to somehow detract from that, it's going to be harder for him to admit that. If he's supposed to be in charge and taking care of everything, and he has a debilitating mental illness that precludes him from working, he's probably going to have a lot harder time talking about that, and he's going to be embarrassed about it. There are also two idioms of distress specific to this culture that when we give this presentation in groups, people can usually shed light on it better than I can. But nervios is a wide range of symptoms described in this idiom of distress. And it means literally nerves in English, but it's attributed in this culture as stressful and difficult times. Susto is also something that is an idiom of distress, and it kind of boils down to, depending on what you read about it, that after experiencing a frightening event, the individual's fear their soul has left their body. And I wish I could give you an example of that. I don't have any examples of that, but oftentimes the groups who prevent you can talk to us about that. This group is also more likely to report hearing voices, seeing shadows, and sensing spirits or supernatural things, and they don't consider it something that needs to be treated as a Westerner would. This is also the immigrant and refugee communities. We have a significant amount here in this area. We usually have someone that can co-present with us about this, but he's busy doing another assignment, and he's Congolese and can talk for quite some length about this. But in this area, this mostly consists of South Asian Americans, Arab Americans, and African Americans. And the rules of engagement and the family rules are vary greatly in this culture. There's a great deal of patriarchy that we're not used to on the Western side. And they're more likely to seek support from familiar support and religious leaders. I have found lately that seeking support from religious leaders when dealing with people from this community is really, really helpful. That's not something that I would have considered so much with Westerners, but it's very, very helpful. I've had a call where that took place actually in a mosque, where someone who was having a dissociative event, this wasn't very long ago, and had this, we not had the intervention of the imam, this might have been something that we would have solved with a trip to the ER. But the family got involved, the imam got involved, and the imam and family worked out a way to have the person that was in distress actually go with the imam and stay with him. So that's another option that you can use with this community that isn't always available with a Western one. You have some add?
Yeah, one of the things I would say about this community is this, put yourselves in the role of a police officer for a second. You know, they get sent to many different calls about a myriad of topics. So let's take domestic disputes, for example. You know, police officers, really what we're trying to do here is have officers understand that when you're going into a Muslim household, that there are certain things that need to get considered, right? And sometimes it's just as simple as recognizing, hey, asking a simple question, who should I talk to here? Now, I know that sounds a little strange because officers are trained to take control. And if we're dealing with a domestic situation, you know, we don't want to be, let's say, coddling individuals, you know, but we have to understand that there are lots of different cultural things in play, right? So it doesn't cost us anything to try and honor that, even in some of the worst circumstances. Really what we're looking to do is try and put some money in the credit bank, right? There's nothing more powerful than walking into a room and saying, hey, who do I get to talk to here? It shows that you know, it shows that you understand that there's something different going on. There's some things going on that are outside my culture, and it allows you to gain a little bit more capital. Maybe when you're talking to individuals on a particular call, a lot of the time officers have to separate people and put them into different areas so that they can be interviewed, you know, without being encumbered by other people listening or other people interjecting. So sometimes understanding that, you know, being alone in a room with a female in this culture, with another man, is hugely difficult for people to understand and to take. So maybe the simple modification is that I can position females where they can, you know, where I can interview them away from other people, but in a way that clearly shows that everything's on the up and up, right? So again, we highlight on these things with these different groups because it's about increasing a body of knowledge, and it's about trying to get officers to understand that there are other things going on, with the main goal being, you know, rapport building, right? So that we can get to whatever resolution we need to get to. The next one, and Colin kind of alluded to that there, was regarding immigrant and refugee. One of the things that our department has done over the years with immigrant and refugee populations, there was a time recently when there was a lot of concern within our immigrant and refugee culture, within our children of immigrant and refugees, and concerns about, you know, ICE coming into communities and snatching them up and taking them away and things like that. And rather than do nothing, what our department did is we went around different immigrant refugee groups to kind of show, this is what an Iowa City police vehicle looks like, this is what our logos look like. We're not interested in coming and you know, checking on your legal status. This is what an ICE immigration customs federal government symbols look like. Here are the differences. We don't participate in activities with ICE, and just really wanted to make sure that our immigrant and refugee community understood that we were trying hard to remove barriers to reporting of crimes and to build relationships. One of the things we've done recently is we've added an immigrant and refugee community outreach assistant. His name is Joshua Dabusu, and Joshua comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo and is a fluent French and Lingala speaker. And what Josh does is he will set up presentations within the Congolese community on a variety of different topics. So the most recent one he did was on traffic stops, for example. He went into the community, explained what a traffic stop is, why traffic stops may be done within the community, what you should expect, what some of the questions you're going to be asked, what are some of the documents that you have to show, and just really embrace the educational piece of finding out what is it that immigrant and refugee communities want to know about their police department, and what is it that the police department needs to know and understand about immigrant and refugee communities. So this is an area where we've got quite a bit of work to do, I think, because a lot of people don't know this, but the immigrant and refugee community within Iowa City, within Johnson County, is growing at a faster rate than the domestic people. You know, so people migrating from other states in the union, from Minneapolis or from Chicago or from Kansas City. We are seeing more immigrant and refugees coming from some of these different countries at a faster rate than domestic. So it's really important as a police department that we can stay ahead of that, so that as individuals come into our communities, we can look to find out what their needs are and find out a way of best serving them.
All right, LGBTQIA communities. We deal with this a lot in this area, and it's important to know some of the things that they're up against. 20 to 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ. The reason I try and we teach these things is so that if an officer gets dispatched to a homeless youth, keep in the back of your mind that there's a higher probability that this homeless youth is LGBTQ. And because of that, it has some unique requirements for it, how to handle that call. Gay and bisexual men and bisexual women are more likely to experience depression, substance abuse, and suicidality. So if you're getting sent to a call like that, a suicide or substance abuse call, we keep that in the back of our mind. There's a higher chance that they're going to be part of this group. Depression is 6 times higher among trans population. When I first saw that, I thought it was percent, but it's times. That's an amazing and high amount. 41% of trans people have attempted suicide, and 1 in 5 are homeless. Again, if we're dealing with somebody that's homeless, they're more likely to be part of this community. Another thing you have to remember is that when you're dealing with calls, especially with juveniles, they may not be out to their family yet. So some of the ways we might handle a juvenile call that happens to be a member of this community is you may not use the same method you do with someone who's not part of this community, because you might inadvertently out them to their family. It's something to keep in the front of your mind when you're dealing with that. If you misgender a person from this community, I've been on calls where this happens, that can really heighten their distress. Thankfully, when I saw this happen, it was an officer from another department, and he did just the right thing. He apologized and moved on and used that person's preferred pronoun from then on. There's also going to be a dynamic where the family might they might give you a gender and name differently than they use with their family. And I've had it happen on calls where when I've met this person, they give me their name and gender, but when I go to call their parent, they tell me to use a different one. So in the end, communication is about skills and empathetic listening, not about the assimilation of cultural facts. So if we keep these things in the forefront of our mind when we're dealing with people, we can avoid missteps. And cultural humility is knowing what you don't know and remembering what our own cultural lens is, how that's going to affect what we perceive. So some of the things, we have a whole session set to you about empathetic listening and verbal de-escalation, but some validating openers that really are helpful to let people know that you're listening to them are on this screen. It makes sense that you're feeling this way. I want to respect that you are feeling this way, anything like that. I don't like to use the word normal, but the next one, I can tell or I can see or hear that you're feeling this, or I'm sorry that you're experiencing all this right now. You deserve to have some support. One of the first impressions that we always use is in a way to avoid gender missteps, is I just ask people what their first name is and I offer mine in return, or I'll even open with my first name instead of officer. And then, or you can just ask them, how do you want to be addressed? If you go into a family or a situation where someone has to be concerned about familial shame, you might ask, who can talk to me about what's going on right now? If you make a misstep, just move past it. If you come across something that you haven't seen before, be okay with saying that. Say, I want to be respectful. I haven't seen this before. Can you explain it to me? If you make any missteps, don't be afraid to apologize.
And I think one of the things we try and hammer across to officers and to anyone who's listening to this presentation, if you're in a role where you are interfacing with people from different cultural backgrounds, and if part of that role is to help individuals who are in crisis, then the whole importance of empathy is almost, it's everything to how the interaction goes. And I always tell police officers, if you've reached the point where, it's a tough job that police officers do, and if you've reached the point where your empathy is eroded or absent, it's time to go and get a different job, is what we say. I used to think that empathy could be faked, and if you don't have any more, then fake it. But I've kind of evolved since then, because I think individuals deserve genuine help. And I don't think you can help someone in a genuine way if you don't have genuine empathy for individuals. So empathy is at the forefront of everything that we do as police officers. Everything is at the forefront of everything we do as we train police officers, and it's extremely important in when you're dealing with individuals from different cultural groups. I mentioned earlier, I think we were given 45 minutes for the presentation, and so we tried to condense things and get the timing right. I don't think we did too bad. It's 12:27. These are some of the references I was making reference to earlier about the research that was utilized. Anybody who would like a reference sheet to have can certainly have that. But you can see there's quite extensive work gone into putting this information together. And we hope you enjoyed it. I'll open it up for questions again. I should have a little question slide at the end. We should make a note of that, right? Mm-hmm. We should put a question slide right there. Thank you. I guess before we have questions, I want to thank you all for taking the time to come here over the lunch hour and hear what we have. As I mentioned, this is about trying to bolster confidence within the public that their police agencies are thinking about this stuff, are training on this stuff. I always get on my soapbox a little bit when I present this, because oftentimes people think that this is a knee-jerk reaction to some of the more high-profile incidents that's happened in the last couple of years. That's not the case. We put this presentation together several years ago and delivered it, and we're very proud of it. We're trying to tweak it. We're going to meet with Alison and try and update it a little bit. I'm interested in your feedback, not because we just like to get pats on the back, although those are nice, but we are genuinely interested in your feedback about whether or not you enjoyed the presentation, whether you're pleased about your police agency, your local police agency taking this approach. But generally, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank Colin, who gives up his time. He doesn't have to be here. This is a passion project for him also. And he really brings tremendous value to what we do here. So I'll thank Colin publicly. Thank you all for being here, and then open it up for any questions that you might have.
So I would just like to thank both of you so much. This was a wonderful presentation. And, I grew up in Iowa City, and I'm 69 years old. So the Iowa City of today is so different from when I was a child. And we have been enriched with all these different people who have come here. But it also makes us have to learn and become familiar with these different cultures and respect them. And, it's just, we are in a really interesting place. And thank you for the work you guys do. It's wonderful.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Mary Lou.
I want to stop sharing your screen, and then we can see everybody on the screen. It might be easier for question and answers. Does anybody have a question?
I don't
really have a question. I just want to echo what Mary Lou was saying. Thank you for all that you do. I've seen you guys give this presentation before, and each time I've seen it, I've picked up something new. It kind of is like our family to family classes that we teach. There's always something new to learn, even if we're the ones teaching it. So thank you for coming and sharing it with this audience. I appreciate it, you guys.
Thank you, Leslie.
Well, I would say if anybody has questions or wants to talk in any greater detail about some of the things that are going on within your police department, don't hesitate. I know all of you, I think, that are on the call. I'm very, I feel like I'm in a very privileged position to be able to try and educate myself and deliver this to officers, and we can only continue to do this as feedback from our presentations is provided, that it's beneficial and that it's important work. We still think it's important work, so we'll continue to do that. But we truly appreciate you taking the time to come and listen, and thank you all for doing that. Greatly appreciate it.
Andrew and Colin, could I just make one comment before we go? Because you mentioned about religious leaders, and I think that's very important that many people, particularly, and even in the standard American culture, may approach a religious leader before they do a healthcare professional. And in 2020, I was really impressed that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services created this. It's a guide, because many religious leaders really don't know how to approach or interact with someone coming to them with a mental health problem. So this guide is out there, and we printed some up this way, but it's out there on the U.S. Health and Human Services. If that's ever something you guys want to take a look at too, as a, it's just another piece of an aid that we can help people understand.
I appreciate you saying that. We're always looking to try and see if we can put some, I call it putting more meat on the bones, right? So as a resource, that might be something we should look into, but I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
I really do.
Thank you.
Well, I guess we'll cut out. You know where I am if you need anything. Thanks for the opportunity again. We truly appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. A reminder to the rest of our group, next month, our Lunch and Learn will be our annual NAMI picnic, which we haven't been able to have for the last couple of years, and we're going to be at Big Grove, and more details coming soon about that event. And then in August, let me see, I wrote it down, August 17th, importance of sleep health and mental wellness will be our topic. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.